Hi, you're tuned into Ceasefire magazine. My name's Adam Elliott Cooper, and today we're joined by Akala for part 2 of our exclusive interview. Thanks for joining us today, Akala. British singer Lily Allen and US rapper Macklemore have both stirred up controversy recently by addressing issues of gender and sexuality. Why do you think they've chosen hip-hop culture in particular to address these issues?
Because blackness is the agency of vice. We all know that good, lovely, angelic white people can't possibly be depraved or in any way amoral without some non-white agency teaching them to be immoral. So even if artists don't realize that they're doing that, when white people want to look clever or human or caring, the last thing they're going to do is surround themselves with a bunch of coons. I've never seen that in the history of entertainment where when a white person wants to look smart, they say, well, the 6 youngest kids in Britain to ever take GCSEs are all black. And they're all Nigerian, in fact. So let me surround myself with Nigerians, because Nigerians are synonymous with intelligence. You don't see that. But when people want to look ghetto or gangster or gully or down or slutty, then they surround themselves with black bodies. And then get defensive when you call it. Right? I've had this where I've called artists and I've been polite. I've not even been a bully, just being polite with artists when I don't really have a duty to be polite with artists and saying, hold on a minute. Why are white artists trying to sell themselves off black men killing each other or off sexualized images of black people? Which I expect, but then don't get sensitive about when people call you on it. But why are people trying to sell themselves off of that particular image of blackness? Why do they know that will resonate with their white audience? Because I don't see them, the same people who are happy to associate with black on black violence. I don't see them putting white racist violence in their videos and say, look, I'm going to sell. There's no coolness, there's no cachet in the Ku Klux Klan hanging men from trees and cutting their dicks off, right? That doesn't make you look particularly cool, and no one wants to deal with that. But you know, young black men blowing each other's heads off just has a certain rhythm to it, doesn't it? Just because people listen to rap music or listen to reggae doesn't mean they respect black people. Let's be clear. A white artist that respects this tradition and this culture would immediately recognize I'm white. There's some things I just can't do. See, a lot of white people feel that they should be the only people on earth that shouldn't have to be conscious of their colour. I have to be conscious all the time. If the police pull me over right now, right, or even when the police are behind me, as they were for ages yesterday, I'm conscious of who I am and what I am, right? And that's just the reality of the world. So white people saying, oh, but black people do it, it's bollocks, right? You have to be conscious of the fact, whether you like it or not, you are white, and you have a historical relationship to these people. I have to recognise that my dad's Jamaican, my mum's Scottish, and that brings with it whatever baggage it brings with it. But a lot of people feel that to be made conscious of their whiteness is racism. They feel that's where the racism is. How dare you point out the fact that I'm white and I'm doing it. Black male rappers do this all the time. Yes, they do, and they should be called on it.
In 2011, Mark Duggan was killed by the police, sparking the biggest riots in Britain for over 20 years. Next week is the end of the inquiry into the killing of Mark Duggan. Do you think it's going to bring any changes? And what do you think it tells us about the relationship between the black community and the police in Britain today?
Bruv, police ain't going to jail for killing no one, let alone black people. Like, police are not there to protect people. When the people who pay the police's wages, us, regular people who pay the majority of the taxes in this country, when we protest against rich people, who protects them? If the police are public servants, right, if they're there to serve me and you, everyday people. Now, I'm not saying there are not some people who are good individuals in the police force. I'm not saying there are not some functions that the police serve that are useful. That's not what I'm saying. Obviously, if your child goes missing, having a function, a person you can call, an organised force with resources that can go and find your child, or at least, you know, if there are paedophiles in the world, you know, someone needs to deal with them. I'm not saying that everything police do is redundant. What I'm saying is their function, how they historically came into existence, and the primary function they serve is not to protect people like me and you, which is why when people like me and you are pissed off and we want to voice that, these are the barrier between us and the people they were invented to protect. So the killing of people like Mark Duggan, and he's not the only one, the killing of poor people generally, which the police have been permitted to get away with, but black men particularly, is symbolic. It's letting black men know, listen, you can run up your mouth all you want. You can have muscles and testosterone and run fast and sleep with women as much as you want. We can fear you, we can project that fear in the media, but ultimately we can kill you. The same people that you pay, the same people that everyone else can call to protect them. There are people in this country that actually pick up the phone to the police and feel protected. To me, that's amazing. Like that's a whole different world from the world I live in, because the last people I'd call if I was in trouble is the police. because it's just in my world you don't do that. And I'm an academic now, but from the background of you just don't call the police. It's something I can see. That's not how we deal with things. Not because we don't respect law and order, but because in our lives the police have not been a force for justice. Most of us have family members, if not friends or uncles or cousins, who were strip searched and battered in the back of vans by the Special Patrol Group in the 70s and 80s. Many of us have family members that have been killed, you know. So our view of this is nothing new to us. And so no police officers are going to go to jail. The only time they've ever gone to jail for killing a black person, I believe, correct me on this if I'm wrong, was David Olawale. And they didn't go to jail for murder, even though they beat him to death and pissed on his body and threw him in Leeds Canal in 59 or 69. This was in Leeds. The police officers were put on trial. And what Britain learned then was that even though Britain is racist, is that white people will convict white police officers if the evidence is overwhelming. The British state learned that very early. It's like, we know we've got a lot of racist propaganda, but if our police officers beat a black man to death, piss on his body and throw him in a canal, even back in the 60s, in this country, a white jury will convict police officers. That is what happened. So very quickly they said, we're not going to repeat that mistake. The police officers went to jail for like 4 years or something. So then they started this thing called inquest. Police I kill you, I don't get an inquest. Right? If I shoot you, there's no inquest. Kingsley goes to jail for murder. Police shoot someone, why is there an inquest? They lied about him being armed, we know that, right? He was shot at point blank range, we know that. There's so much evidence we have of police misconduct in relation to his death. The entire media was informed that this young gentleman had a gun and that he fired first. So Britain had been able to make up its mind about this young black man who has a white mum in an instant. And just like every other case of this nature, the police will not serve jail time, they will not be punished. And people will act like it's an injustice, but it's not an injustice. It's a justice. Unless you believe the justice system is there to give you justice, what are you smoking? You know, the Crown Court, it's right there in the name. The Crown is immune from prosecution. You cannot prosecute the Crown. People have tried it. Because the Crown is immune from prosecution because they are the Crown Courts. They work for the Crown. I'm not saying this to be horrible. Like, that's what they're there to do. They're there to serve that power. So to think that they're going to disobey that is ludicrous. That wouldn't be doing their job properly.
Your work with the Hip Hop Shakespeare Company often involves an analysis of language. Recently, schools and local authorities have come under fire for banning words like bear and in it within their schools. Why do you think they've done this? And what do you think it tells us about the education system?
It tells us that people are just as classist and just as racist as they've ever been, but also just as unintelligent. Because the same people that will lecture us on this clearly don't know the history of the English language very well, right? The English language, Old English, was once upon a time considered the commoners, mucky, downgraded language. Nobody wanted to write in English. They wanted to write in Latin or French, because Latin and French were the middle class and upper class languages. And now English has some proudness to it. People are proud to speak English, right? But that wasn't the case 1,000 years ago. So people who don't know the history of the English language, don't know how the English language came to develop, don't know that slang, don't know that the makeup of everyday commoners' words has come into this lexicon that we now call English and massively informed this language. The whole language has had to change because of the prevalence that English gained with English power as opposed to French or Latin power. But that said, during that process it was a constant dialogue. When an elite spoke Latin, English was a suppressed language. Now English is a language of primacy. All around the world it suppresses, or when we had direct colonialism, the indigenous languages were suppressed. Languages of the poor are suppressed. And so in the same way, banning of these slang words is just an extension of that. This idea that there's only one correct way to speak English, there's only one proper English, which is all about class, all about power. The type of speech that has a military to back it up is the only legitimate speech. And so banning these words is about that. It's no reflection of a person's intelligence or ability to pass an exam. As I can tell you, I got an A star in English. I got 100% on my English GCSE. I'm not saying that to be arrogant. It's just a fact. And I spoke exactly like that when I was 15 because I knew how to speak in different contexts. That's all you have to teach someone. There are different contexts within which to speak. But this focus on what people believe to be Jamaican-derived slang fascinates me a lot. There are not schools in England that Scottish kids attend on the border, let's say Carlisle, saying you can't come here and say we, mate, and use Scottish words. So we can see the racialized dynamic in this as well. And it's a pathetic attempt for people who can't be bothered to educate kids properly, or young people properly, to pretend that what they're doing is education, but it's not. It's elitism, it's trash, it's nonsense, it's crap.
A coalition of Caribbean islands have recently put together a legal campaign looking for reparations for the legacies of empire and enslavement. Do you think these campaigns are likely to be successful? And what do you think they should look like?
Let's be clear. I happen to know a very good reparations lawyer who has been involved in many of those campaigns. A sister called Esther Stanford, who taught me a lot about the legal precedent. See, when you talk about reparations for black people, everyone gets their backs up because of their guilt. Reparations is not new. It's an established legal principle. If I crash into you and it's my fault, I have to repair the damage, right? And even in a historical sense, there have been historical injustices where a legal case for reparations has been put forward and people have been paid, and even the descendants of those people have been paid benefits for harm caused. The Nazi Holocaust being the most obvious and prevalent and well-known example of that. So this isn't a new thing, and it's an established legal principle. And it's a struggle that has been going on for quite a while. Let's also be clear, when slavery ended, British slave owners were given reparations, £20 million reparations for their loss of property. When the Haitian Revolution had concluded and Haiti began to be an independent nation, once the French and the British and the Americans had all made up and got back on the same team, the French threatened to reinvade Haiti in 1825 and extorted from Haiti reparations for their loss of property and for their loss of colony and for their loss of their slaves, right? Money that the Haitians, I believe, were laboring to pay back until 1947. So when people act like this is ancient history that doesn't have a direct legacy, they're of course having a very significant selective memory. The property that former slave owners obtained in the Caribbean has allowed them to still have, you go to the Caribbean today, you know, the 12 European descended families that are in Jamaica own most of the island, along with neo-colonial American tourist interests and a few small Chinese and Indian families that, to be fair to them, came to Jamaica and worked their way up and have a cultural incubation in a way that allowed them to rise in Jamaican society. And also, of course, because they didn't have there wasn't the same guilt complex attached to Chinese and Indian labour in the same way. There was certainly a greater degree of freedom. That's not to take anything away from them, because the Chinese and Indians didn't come to Jamaica as elites and slave owners and have worked their way up in the Caribbean generally. Not totally. Trinidad is a bit more complicated. But this kind of legal case is necessary and should be brought. But I am nervous sometimes. When we have governments in Caribbean islands that are not necessarily revolutionary governments, they're not people-led governments, it makes me nervous when some of those governments are bringing these kinds of cases. And I say that because if there is then a settlement made that's massively underwhelming, that is massively underestimated, right? Because at some point a settlement will be made. Right? I believe that, because there will come a point in history where African power demands this sort of case to be brought in a particular way. It would be easier to settle with some sellout governments, pay them a little bit that you know they're going to piss up the wall, maintaining the current system of neocolonialism in the Caribbean anyway, than it would be when a genuine coalition of revolutionary governments come in, people-led governments come in, that intend to change the entire structure of the Caribbean's relationship to white capital. You don't want to pay those people any money, right? And you've never paid those people any money. And so what does concern me a little bit is potentially that kind of a scenario coming, where we have academic and educated middle-class and upper-class Caribbeans bringing this kind of case, but with no genuine interest of serving the masses of their people. Just because they're black doesn't mean that they're going to be loyal to their people. History shows us this. And so I think the case is necessary, and these cases are necessary. I am just concerned that there would be an agenda, or maybe is an agenda, because it was quite widely covered. The case got quite a lot of press. Whenever something gets press, I'm like, why are they covering this now? You got UCL doing this investigation about which families receive money. Like I said, I could see there being a settlement, a massively underwhelming settlement given to people that we know, our mates basically. We give some money, and then we can all be guilt-free. We've paid reparations, right? But all we've done is given money to black elites in the Caribbean. Black elites didn't suffer. You understand? Black elites collaborated the whole time. They shouldn't get the money. They're not the people that suffered just because they're black, right? The black masses of the Caribbean are the people whose situation needs to change because they're the people who are dealing directly with the legacy of slavery, and they're the people who suffered. So if Caribbean governments are not saying, do not outline in a plan of how they would use any reparations money, we would use this reparations money to fund X, to fund the redistribution of property in the Caribbean, to make sure industries like tourism, or in a country like Jamaica where we pay 50% or something bloody ridiculous out of our national budget to the IMF and the World Bank, to make sure that is done away with, to make sure the bauxite and the aluminium is used to serve the interests of the masses of Jamaican people. And I'm just taking Jamaica because it's the island I know most about, but the same principle should be applied to all the other islands. If the governments of the Caribbean are not coming with that kind of agenda, or at least the kind of agenda that someone like Aristide was coming with, poverty with dignity. He wasn't even coming with revolution, he wasn't saying overthrow the upper class, and he got taken out of power twice. Why? No one from the West is going to negotiate with giving Aristide the money. In fact, they blocked aid going to Haiti. All that aid we were giving to Haiti because the Haitian people had the cheek to elect a man that represented poor people, right? The aid was blocked. We all know this. So they won't even give the aid that was directly given to, you ain't gonna give reparations to no revolutionary government. So that's all that, not to put a downer on it, I think it's great that these cases are being brought. I think it's a necessary part of the historical process, but I think those of us that are not elitists need to monitor the ways in which cases are being brought in our name, because there is a history of people. There's black scumbags like there's scumbags in every group of people, right? And there's a history of people saying, oh, my heart bleeds, we've suffered so bad, give me some money, right? We've seen it in America. People who were campaigning for civil rights all during the 60s are now cheerleading for the White House, just because there's a brown man in the White House. What kind of bullshit is that? Do you understand? You know what I mean? Like, so one said, when black people were being lynched, it was a problem, but when America is the leading imperial power in the world, it's silence. We've got our brown man in the White House. So anyway, so for me, yeah, it's bittersweet.
Well, thanks very much for talking to Ceasefire today, Akala. It was fantastic having you on.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Big up.